In 1928, a young Richard Hollingshead was working as a sales manager at his family's auto parts store in Camden, New Jersey. Hollingshead was a movie buff, but he couldn't share his passion with his mother. As the story goes, she was a rather large woman who couldn't fit comfortably into theater seats of the day. So Hollingshead decided to bring the theater to her. His mother sat in the family car on which he placed a projector. From there, he tied 2 sheets together between 2 trees and pressed play. The drive-in movie theater was born. Hollingshead was onto something. He combined America's growing reliance on cars and passion for car culture with the growing movie industry. He began experimenting with drive-in theater layouts that would allow each car to have a clear view of the screen. In May 1933, he patented his concept. A month later, the first drive-in theater opened in Camden, New Jersey. Park It Theaters. By 1949, his patent was overturned, and other operators were able to open their own independent drive-ins. Drive-in theaters became a staple of American culture for the better part of the rest of the 20th century. But now, there are fewer than 300 remaining. So, what happened? You may be quick to point to advancements in technology like the television and VHS tape, but that's only part of the story. This is the rise and fall of the drive-in theater. America in the 50s and 60s was prime for the drive-in theater. Soldiers were starting families, the economy was booming, and car culture had officially taken over. Drive-ins were the perfect place for families and young couples seeking some alone time. Throughout these 2 decades, some 5,000 theaters sprung up across the country.
Well, I think in the 50s, they were more like a place where people could, not only, get some kind of entertainment, but could also, socialize with friends, that kind of thing. The thing was, you could bring the whole family. You didn't have to worry about the kids, making noise or any of those kind of problems. Everybody just piled in the car and, that was sort of your living room. You basically brought your living room to the drive-in.
But despite this initial success, the first holes were already showing up in the drive-in model. The first being space.
The property values of a drive-in theater are normally very high. It's prime commercial property. And we all know how much commercial property is right now. Our theater is about 13 acres. They vary. Everybody has, you can have a single, you can have a double, you can have a triple like Warwick. Some theaters have 5 and 6 screens and plus, so it's whatever you decide to use on your property that they have.
According to the New York Film Academy, drive-ins had to be at least 15 acres to be effective and financially stable, and most of them were set up on the outskirts of growing towns. At the time most were established, these towns were growing quickly. The country was in the midst of a suburban boom. Americans were leaving cities and flocking to suburbs, making land increasingly more valuable. Between 1950 and 1970, Americans' suburban population nearly doubled to 74 million. For drive-in theater owners, it soon became a more lucrative option to close down their drive-ins and sell their lands to developers.
And that actually happened to a drive-in that I worked in when I was in high school. It was in Haltom City, Texas. It all of a sudden, during the 1980s, it was gone, and what replaced it was like a small, little community of condos, and that was sort of the end of the drive-in, in that town.
The drive-ins that survived were faced with another challenge: competition with cinemas. Indoor theaters were springing up in the same suburbs targeted by drive-in theaters, and they had an advantage. Indoor theaters could run multiple showings a day. Drive-ins, on the other hand, could only operate at night and only were able to show 1 or 2 films per screen per night. Therefore, studios distributed their first-run films to indoor theaters. This meant the drive-ins were left with B-list films, previously released films, and, eventually, adult films.
It was probably more expensive, to rent the A-list films, so they didn't make as much money. And the operating profits, profit margin probably got, more thin, by the 70s and 1980s, that kind of thing. So in order for them to be competitive, they could get these B movies cheaper. And at the same time, it created sort of like a cult place to go where they'd have like slasher films and, all these strange horror movies.
But arguably the biggest blow to the drive-in business came in 1966 with the Uniform Time Act.
And the overwhelming sympathy of our people is for daylight saving time. As a delegation to the Senate from this county, we want to assure the people of this county that we're going to oppose any bill that would seek to prevent daylight saving time.
When we first get ready to open in March, it's dark by 7 o'clock. Now with daylight savings time, we gain a minute of lightness every day up until June 22nd, I think it is. So we actually have to push our start times. Right in the beginning of June is about 8:50, but once we hit like June 20th, the first day of summer, we're almost about 9:15.
Films would now be beginning at 10 p.m., making families less likely to attend. Daylight savings was such a threat to the business model that drive-ins ran ads like these during intermission. And finally, in the late 1970s,
thanks to Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set, now you can automatically videotape your favorite show even when you're not home and watch it anytime you want.
For the first time, families could rent or buy VHS tapes and watch them in the comfort of their own homes. Movie theaters, both indoor and out, became less appealing to the general public.
In the 1970s, there was still a bunch of drive-ins in the U.S., but what happened was so many different types of entertainment and media came into vogue. Blockbuster video came into being really successful. And instead of going to the drive-in, people would basically got lazy, just stayed at home and watched the movies, in their living room. So you could basically, do the same thing but not have to leave the house. At the same time, you had so many other avenues of entertainment by then. It wasn't like in the 1950s where it was limited to either, people playing an instrument at home or listening to the AM radio and then the drive-in. That was about it, or the movie theater.
Today, there are fewer than 300 drive-in theaters across the US. But since the coronavirus pandemic, many drive-ins have seen an uptick in attendance as they are the perfect space for a socially distanced night out on the town. In early July, Walmart announced a partnership with Tribeca Enterprises, in which it would convert 160 of its parking lots into socially distant drive-in movie theaters this summer. So, while the industry has faced many hurdles, it seems that the drive-in still hasn't reached its twilight yet. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you'll be notified whenever we release a new video.